What's up guys, welcome back to Destiny Updates. Since they published the Destiny cover issue, Game Informer has regularly been putting out Destiny related articles and interviews on their site. I already covered the one with competitive multiplayer info, since that seemed quite important, but I haven't had time to cover all the rest. Since there's a lot to go through here, I'm gonna try to summarize the important bits and cut through things that we already know. Almost everything here is paraphrased with my interpretation of it, and not exact quotes, unless I specifically say otherwise. Another thing is, since this is a longer video covering lots of stuff, I've decided to put timestamps with different topics in the description below. So if you get bored or are only interested in a specific thing, please look below and use them to jump to what you're interested in. Real quick before we start, I'd like to mention that if you're interested in Titanfall, my friend Titanfall Nexus covers all the latest info for the game, much like I do for Destiny. He's at about 800 subscribers now, and I was really hoping he could get past 1,000 before the end of the year. So if you're interested, please do check him out, linked in the description below. I also have close friends who cover Halo and Star Wars Battlefront, linked below as well if you care about those games. Anyways, let's get into the news. There's a lot to cover. First, a video interview with Tyson Green about designing the RPG elements of Destiny. There's some interesting stuff in here, so let's go through it. First, he talks about the importance of progression in Destiny, mentioning Halo 3 and ODST's Vidmaster challenges and how successful they were. He also talks about Borderlands and kind of says how he likes all the loot, but that there's not all that much to use it on. Expanding that the combat isn't all that engaging, there's not much to do at the end of the game, and it doesn't have a real strong multiplayer component. One other thing he says is that their loot drops will not be quite as frequent as other action RPGs, such as Borderlands, but they'll be more meaningful. He also said that there's a system that should make all the loot dropped for you be worth looking at, be stuff that you're interested in. He essentially said that if something drops and you don't care about it, that needs to be fixed. Going on, he said that they want players to make a commitment, and even be locked into some of their choices for a period of time, as this makes players more unique and invested. I personally think that sounds fine. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what we'd be locked into, but so long as it makes sense, I think choices should matter. Moving on, he says that there's no wrong way to build a character in Destiny. There's no wrong decisions. This is because they don't want people to be anxious about their decisions and have to go online to find the best one or copy the best build or whatever. So basically, they want your decisions to be meaningful, and they may even force you to commit to them for some period of time, but they also don't want to give you any bad options. After that, he talked about the game not being a linear experience that's spoon-fed to you. They want Destiny to have real depth, with mechanics that you may figure out over time, which will make you a better player. He also said they're making encounters and activities where it won't be immediately clear what you have to do, and you're actually going to fail. He sort of stressed how it's a AAA game that you can actually fail in, which I think is awesome. Too often games are a clear linear experience where it's hard not to succeed. I really appreciate that Destiny will have encounters or modes that are difficult and actually challenging. Now to ease that in, he did remind us that they are making activities for every mood. So if you just want to relax and ease into a game after a long day, they will definitely support that. He said that the story missions are a good example of that, something more relaxing and fun without as much of the challenge. While he didn't specify, I imagine raids will be the challenging game mode, perhaps with strikes somewhat in the middle. I'm not sure though, we'll have to wait for more details on those. That was everything I found worth mentioning for that interview. Since it was a video interview, it's a bit easier to absorb than a text article, so if you care to watch the whole thing, it's about 6 minutes, and you can find it linked in the description below. Next up is a massive 3-page interview with Bungie co-founder and design director Jason Jones, talking a lot about the backstory, the world, and progression. Much of this lengthy interview is stuff that's already known, but there's some extremely interesting new things in here as well, so let's go through it. Pretty much the entire first page is stuff that we already know. On the second page, he talks about how the game started as a pure fantasy world, which again we knew, but he said, "We felt the pure fantasy was missing all these things we loved. Literally, explosions." And that's a quote. He was sort of half joking, but also slightly serious. I just thought that was amazing though and had to mention it. He was then asked the MMO comparison question. His reply was quite lengthy, and again, mostly stuff we know, but he essentially said that they're building a shooter, with the gameplay elements you'd expect. They're also taking things they've learned from MMOs and other genres, but those add on to the game. They're not the core. After that, he actually talks about something very interesting, the basis for the story. This is rather long, but I feel like I should read the whole thing off, rather than just summarizing. So Game Informer said, "You mentioned an interesting metaphor, the origin coming out of the idea of a Camelot, and the knights going out on their quest. What is your Grail quest here? You've got these guardians, what are they doing?" Jason Jones answers, "I was actually not going to talk about this, but I can do a little bit. Let me give you the short wind-up to the story, the thing that's going to be in the first 60 seconds of the game. A few years from today, our present, this alien intelligence, the Traveler, comes to Earth. And we don't know a lot, we don't remember a lot about this time, but we know a few things that are to survive. We don't know if the Traveler was a ship, or a god, or a moon, or whatever, but we know this thing came, and we know that it settled on Mars, and that it began to share its amazing technology with us, and a city grew up around it. And it started what we now call the Golden Age. And humanity spread throughout the solar system. Human lifespan tripled. We terraformed planets. It was amazing. It was the best times humanity had ever seen. But the Traveler had enemies. One enemy in particular. And when that enemy caught up with it at Earth, an enemy that had been chasing it for millennia across the galaxy, a horrible battle happened. We remember almost nothing about this. This is the distant past of the game. That's what we call the collapse. So that's the solar system we inherit. It's one where humanity had spread to all worlds, all the moons, all the asteroid belts, had built great things, and then had to abandon them, being driven out of them and been killed. And humanity shrunk back after this battle against the ancient enemy of the Traveler, where the Traveler itself was crippled and fell silent above Earth. Humanity was driven back to this one spot underneath the Traveler, the one safe spot in the solar system, and built the city. That's where the Guardians come from, and the Guardians' Grail quest is to drive back the darkness and wake the Traveler. And then in fact, it just got worse than that, because this ancient enemy of the Traveler, the darkness, is returning. And so there's even more urgency, and another battle is going to be fought, and the Traveler is crippled and silent. Without it, we'll be defenseless. So that was all very interesting in my opinion. I wouldn't have guessed that the Traveler showed up a few years from now in modern day. The fact that the Traveler settled on Mars is also very unexpected, and that makes me wonder if Mars will have some special significance as a result. Then the collapse being caused by the Traveler's ancient enemy, this mysterious darkness, is also pretty cool. That means the Traveler was a blessing for many years in the Golden Age, but it's also responsible for bringing the darkness to the solar system, so it's kind of a curse too. Then there's the fact that they're trying to wake the Traveler, also very interesting. That also reinforces the thought that it isn't dead, more like unconscious. That sounds like it could make for one hell of a finale at some point, if they wanted to end the series in 10 years or whatever. I can just imagine the darkness is closing in around us. We've been pushed back again, everything is looking bad, and then at the last minute we manage to revive the Traveler, and then there's this insanely awesome, massive battle. I'm not sure how it would work, but it sounds good in my head. Anyway, I'm certainly looking forward to learning much more about the darkness and everything else. Going on, he said the Traveler still protects the city. There's some short-ranged aura directly around it. We have heard this mentioned before. After that, they asked if the story has some end, if there's some end goal in the initial release. Jones basically said that there is, that it's important that when you reach the end of the conflict, the climax, that it's satisfying and feels good. And that's meant in a narrative sense, so don't be thinking dirty. But then he continued that when you reach the end, that's really still the beginning in many ways. There's so much more that you can do in Destiny outside of the story missions. Going on, he said that they really want people to bounce around the different things Destiny has to offer. Without forcing you, they want to encourage you to do a bit of everything. and a big part of that will be growing your character and getting new things throughout the different modes. But he also says that if you only want to play one mode, that option is available. I'll quote him on this. He says, "Sometimes you do just want to have you and the other guy and see who's going to win over and over again for 6 hours in a row for 3 weeks in a row. And that's fine, we're not going to take that away. We're going to do the best that we can with unified progression to make sure that every time you play, competitive or cooperative if that's your thing, you're getting tempted by these other activities. Because I think people who enjoy the game, both the character and the world, are really going to enjoy taking that character into other activities." I think it's great that they will support players who only want to play competitive, or anything else. I myself will probably be the type that plays a bit of everything, and if anything, I'll probably spend most of my initial time with the game at the beginning in the story missions. For me, an amazing story and world is what gets me immersed in the game, and also gets me excited for sequels, more than anything else. The final thing they talked about was how they'll keep players coming back, with the progression idea. Jones essentially says that people love to build and accomplish things, to feel like you've made progress. That's the progression idea that most action games don't have much of. He thinks the joy of typical action games comes from a physical side, which he compares to snowboarding or driving or even chopping wood. That sort of satisfaction when you shoot something or even control something in-game. Jones says that those two things, the progression, feeling of accomplishment, and the physical action feel, can be merged together, and Destiny can use them both. That's everything I felt was new or important to cover in this long interview, but it's still a good read, so if you'd like to check it out, it is linked below. Next is a shorter 2-page interview with technical director Chris Butcher discussing the matchmaking and network technology that powers Destiny. To begin, he basically says that they're taking the mesh-based networking that they've been using for years and years on Halo and adapted it to work in this interconnected world. I'm not going to go into too much detail because honestly I don't understand it all that well, but they're definitely using a peer-to-peer system like Halo and many other games use, with dedicated servers to link it all together. I'm a little bit disappointed by that, but I suppose we saw it coming really. The thing that worries me is the lag and host switching and disconnects that we always have in Halo, COD, etc. due to the connection issues between players. They're saying it's an advanced system, and I'm sure they've put a ton of work into it, so I really hope that they've figured out a way around these issues. Now he's saying the reason for this is because it removes the barriers that separate dedicated servers have. It also means that any public event or social hub can always be populated, since people aren't divided into separate servers. At the same time though, I'm fairly sure that Elder Scrolls Online is going to be running a single shard dedicated server, meaning that anyone can play together without those problems, and without the potential lag issues of player hosting. It's also able to have hundreds of players in a given space as a result. But then again, Elder Scrolls Online has a monthly subscription fee, something I absolutely despise, so I guess I shouldn't complain. I do believe that Bungie knows what they're doing and wouldn't be using this system if it obviously didn't work properly. After that, he was asked if the current gen, or I guess you'd say last gen now, consoles will have networking limitations. He basically said no, that with their new engine fully optimized for this, they're squeezing every bit of juice out of the Xbox 360 and PS3, and that's leaving them plenty of headroom to give everyone a consistent experience. And then he once again said that all of the networking is invisible to the players. You're able to traverse the world in a seamless fashion, never needing to know that you're being switched to a different instance. Which is of course completely awesome and one of the biggest features of Destiny's multiplayer. The final thing they talked about was how they account for different player skill levels in competitive multiplayer. He didn't give details, but he said that they have best of class practices to make sure that the matches are as fair as possible. He also said that while you obviously want to win the game will still reward you if you don't. An example he gave is that there's always a guy in the studio up in some high place sniping everyone. Since he's getting a lot of kills and you're in the underdog type of situation, if you get a few kills on him throughout the match, the game will reward you for it. That's everything I wanted to cover there. If you'd like more specifics, feel free to check it out for yourself, linked below. Next is a 2-page article talking about the 4 enemy races of Destiny. Although it is very interesting, there isn't any hugely relevant news in it, and I'm really trying to avoid taking too many days to finish this video, so I may save this article for a different video sometime in the future. This is something that's definitely worth reading for yourself though, as it's not terribly long or boring, and has some interesting backstory on the races. One thing though that I will mention real quick, which I thought was very interesting, is this part about the Vex. Chris Barrett says, "They're creating armies. They're creating these big warp gates around the solar system. They can potentially bring in armies from elsewhere." He went on to talk about time travel and other things, but I just thought that bit about the warp gates was extremely interesting and cool. It also instantly made me think of this, recently shown in the VGX trailer earlier this month, and actually shown once before in a pre-alpha build back in February, one of the first in-game images we ever saw. So it's cool to see the comparison from then till now. Moving on, they did a video interview with Bungie's composers, Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore. There really wasn't any direct news in it, but I strongly recommend watching it for yourself. It's only 5.5 minutes and I really enjoyed it. Both of them are super awesome guys, and they make amazing music. And it was fun to listen to, especially when Mike came in. So go check it out, again, it's linked below. The final thing to talk about is a video interview with art director Christopher Barrett. He talks a lot about the start of the design process, especially from the art side. He talks about the inspiration for the game as well, and they show a bunch of old concept art in the background. If you saw my GDC breakdown video way back in March, or have been following the game since then, you've likely already seen and heard all of this, but if you're more of a newcomer, or even if you just want to hear more, then I'd recommend checking it out. As always, it's linked below. So that's absolutely everything from Game Informer that I was behind on. Turns out it was quite a lot. They will be releasing something else either later today or tomorrow, depending on when I manage to finish this video, and then they'll have more next week as well. To keep up on it all yourself, check out their Destiny Hub, where they post all of this and say when the next post is coming. As with everything else, it's linked below. Depending on what they release, I'll either cover it on the spot that day, or wait to compile it into another video if it's not important. One last thing to mention before I go, I will be on the Destiny Community Holiday Cast with a bunch of community members, hosted by Destiny Dispatch. We'll be chatting about all things Destiny for some amount of time. I don't really know specifics, but it starts at 4 p.m. Eastern, which is 1 p.m. Pacific, this Saturday. If you want to tune in, it'll be live on their Twitch at twitch.tv/DestinyDispatch. As with absolutely everything else, it will be linked in the description below. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. I know some of this may be late, but I did put a ton of work into compiling all of this for you, so if you enjoyed, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a like. If this could get past 1,000, that'd be super awesome. Also, make sure you leave your thoughts on topics that interest you in the comments below. I love reading them and reply to as many as I can. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next update.